Fired Cats employee claims his boss at Charlotte's light rail system created an abusive and hostile work environment. Those powerful allegations were laid out in a new lawsuit filed against the city, arguing Cats concealed information about a derailment on the Blue Line last year and wrongfully fired the employee. WBT investigative reporter David Hodges has been digging into this lawsuit and joins us live now from the Scaly Bark light rail station that's close to where the derailment happened. David, what do these new claims tell us about Cats?
Well, Brandon, they certainly raise questions about how the light rail system is being run and who exactly is running it. This lawsuit right here makes some powerful allegations claiming that the general manager of Cats Light Rail is creating a hostile work environment, an abusive work environment, and even concealed information about the derailment. Well, I previously investigated this general manager and found there were issues and problems with safety found at his last job. In May 2022, a Cats train car derailed on the Blue Line. Not long after, Cats fired employee Terry Creech from the Rail Operations Control Center for allegedly violating safety procedures after the derailment. Now, Creech has filed a lawsuit against the city of Charlotte and Cats, claiming his termination was fraudulent, that the general manager of the light rail, Deltron Harris, conspired against him and concealed information about the derailment, and that Harris was verbally abusive, created a hostile work environment, and harassed employees. I previously investigated Harris and found a report from his last job that identified a series of major ongoing issues and claimed Harris directed rail controllers to violate safety rules and procedures. Creech's lawsuit claims he tried raising concerns about the stressful work environment and his abusive general manager.
We want them to talk about issues that they see or that they're aware of so that we can address those.
In March, I interviewed Cats interim CEO Brent Cagle about fixing the transit agency's problems and whether more people needed to be held accountable, even after 3 top executives recently left the organization.
You still have a general manager of rail services and also one in safety and security who were at the forefront a lot of this. These are people in high-level positions. Is there accountability that needs to happen there?
Absolutely, we're looking at that. Again, we are trying to understand everything that's brought us to where we are, develop a plan for moving forward, and that doesn't stop at the COO, it doesn't stop at the rail general manager.
Creech's firing exacerbated another problem, a shortage of controllers in the ROCC. In a report on the derailment, state transit safety officials showed concern that Creech was the only controller on shift at the time of the derailment, and after learning he was fired, wrote, quote, "Now a very seasoned rail controller is no longer with the agency." Fast forward 1 year from that to March, and NCDOT did a surprise inspection and found that yet again, sometimes there was only one controller operating in this control center. Well, that is no longer allowed at all. There at least have to be 2, and if Cats can't do that, either the Gold Line or Blue Line would have to shut down until a second controller could get there. We're going to continue to follow that to make sure it's properly staffed, that both train lines can keep running, and we're going to keep following this developing lawsuit and see what we can find out from the city, who did not comment on this new lawsuit. Reporting live in Charlotte, David Hodges, WBTV on your